What's poppin', everybody? This is Wolf94. I have a few Gengar and Mimikyu GX Vileplume matches here, and normally when I use this format, multiple matches, I put some music, but I decided I'm going to give you guys a little bit of commentary, do something different today. Basically give you an explanation while these matches play along, and maybe I'll give you a few pointers and comment on the matches. But basically, Gengar and Mimikyu GX with that poltergeist attack is very similar to one of the strongest Gengar cards we had before in the Stormfront set, the Stormfront Gengar. And this pretty much, the Vileplume Gengar and Mimikyu GX deck is like a slightly shittier version to the old Vilegar. And the reason that I say slightly shittier version is that there's quite a few things that this deck is missing that old deck had, like Spiritomb, an opening Pokemon that gives you that item lock, that trainer lock immediately, and a few other things like the rare candy, the overpowered rare candy back then. Some other decent options when it comes to attacks. Gengar, Mimikyu GX pretty much only have their poltergeist attack, and that's about it. I guess the GX attack, and that's about it. So I built this deck to give me to be able to, as consistently as possible, get the lock by turn 2, get the Vileplume out if you play first, or if you play second, get the Vileplume out by your third turn, while you use your Horror House GX attack with Gengar to get the lock. When it comes to lock decks, item lock decks especially, you gotta get the lock as quickly as possible, as the Seismitoad EX decks will know, and players will know. You know, if you're gonna get the item lock after 3 or 4 turns, your opponent by now has probably had some time to set up, play their items, so it's not as efficient. You want to get it as early as possible, so it's gonna be as effective as it can be. Since we don't have a Pokemon like Spiritomb though, your opponent will always have a free turn to play items, whether you play first or second. So you gotta keep that in mind. They will have a free turn, so once they realize you're playing some sort of item lock deck, like once they see the Oddish and they're thinking Vileplume, they know, okay, I gotta play as many of these items as possible, use my VS Seekers, do what I'm gonna do, so that they don't get stuck in hand. So you already have that sort of disadvantage when your opponent knows that they're going to do everything they can to make your item lock worthless. So what you definitely want to do if you play first is you get your Oddishes out as quickly as possible, which is why I have a big skeleton of Bridgettes in this deck. I've got my Tabulele GX, I've got my Communication, my Mysterious Treasures, you know, all this stuff to dig the supporter and those basic Pokemon in my hand turn 1. And this is where the Emolga comes in too. Some people have said they wonder why Emolga is in here. It's sort of a weird choice, but it does give me a few functions that maybe are not so obvious. For one, it's a free retreating Pokemon, meaning that if I open with it, it's almost like I'm opening with a Gengar. It's like I have 6 chances to open with Gengar, which is the best opening Pokemon and the dude you want to have in the active position. Turn 1, so you can get that Horror House GX attack if you play second or if you're not ready to get Vileplume out. The other reason is that it gives you that sort of a utility, almost like the Propagation Execute does, but it's fairer because you can't do it forever and a billion times in a turn. But it lets you fetch other Emolgas from your deck, and you can discard them with Mysterious Treasure, Ultra Ball, make your Communication live, you know, these sorts of combos. And not only do you get the effects of those cards without paying the cost pretty much, you also thin out your deck. And when it's the case with this sort of deck where I really just want Gengar and Vileplume and that's about it, I don't plan on using any other attackers, I don't plan to do any more stuff to make the combo less viable. You want to have this to be as pure as it can be, so it can be effective, be like Vilegar. So because of I want it to be as pure and consistent as possible, this is where Emolga comes in. It just gives me a bunch of extra basic Pokemon so that we don't mulligan all day for our opponent, give them free cards, while it just helps me perform a few functions, like I've said. Once you grab a few, and then you're going to use Juniper, it's more sort of deck thinning. It's kind of tough to explain, but by now, if you guys have seen my matches, like right now, you probably have seen what I did with Emolga. You can see the utility. It's kind of like how the Lost March deck used this Pokemon to just add it to the hand and make the blender less costly while putting Pokemon in the Lost Zone and drawing, thinning your deck. Right. So, like I've said in the beginning, getting your vileplume out as soon as possible is very, very important. But the other important thing is that to make sure you put something like a floatstone on, because one of the weaknesses of this deck is they try to get the vileplume stuck there, and if you don't have a floatstone on, or if you don't have your Altar of the Moon and you put a psychic energy on the vileplume, you can't retreat. You're gonna be stuck there, and your opponent will basically have you at their mercy. They'll take their time and do what they gotta do to come back in the game or counter you. So what I always aim to do, although it's not always possible, is you get a floatstone on this vileplume. Get a floatstone on the Odysseus before they evolve. What I mean. And the deck, pretty much, guys, from the deck list that I've showed you in the beginning, it really hasn't changed pretty much at all. I only just took out one Mysterious Treasure for a Cherish Ball, a new Cherish Ball, and that's about it. If I had more Gengars, like if I had like a third one, because I only have two, I would do 3 Gengar and Mimikyu GX, drop one of the Emolgas perhaps, and I would still have that sort of mini Emolga engine, but we have more Gengar, so we're a bit safer. Sometimes, if one gets prized and one dies, you don't manage to see the other, you pretty much lose. I played billions of games with this deck the way it is, and it can perform okay. Of course, it does have its weaknesses, but I think I would really want to try and have 3 of these Gengar as opposed to just 2. Speaking of weaknesses, one of this deck's biggest weaknesses, it's almost like an auto loss, is Darkness decks. Whether it's Zoroark GX, whether it's Darkrai Turbo, just Darkrai in general. Like even just Darkrai GX that can do 1 for 30. That's enough to destroy you. Any Dark deck, you would more than likely lose. It's an auto loss. You can't do much about it. The only thing you could do is use something like Weakness Policy. Just something to try and eliminate your weakness, but it's not worth it. You're making the deck a lot more inconsistent, adding, cards that aren't very useful most of the time in your deck. So you just kind of have to accept the loss, I would say. Dark is pretty popular and expanded a lot of the times, but it's just something you have to deal with. I did get lucky a few times, and when I get the lock, when they have billions of items, they can't use them, and they kind of lose on their own in a way. Lose because of their deck's skeleton. Then I did beat the deck a few times, but for the most part, you're probably gonna lose. Even if you do well, there's been situations where I'm down to 1 prize. I managed to grind, do what I can as they're struggling to set up. I'm KOing their big GXs, but eventually they do come back and they die. They pretty much just need like 2 attacks on Gengar and you lose. That's it. So it's not difficult at all for them. But this is one of the main weaknesses of this deck, is basically darkness. The other thing would be safeguard Pokemon, barrier Pokemon like Alolan Ninetales or Hoopa, the ones that block GX Pokemon, because we don't have, I made this deck to be as pure as possible, as one-dimensional as possible, as consistent as it can be. So for you to get the lock as early as possible and start doing high damage with Gengar immediately. So we don't really have any other attackers. The only other attacker realistically in this deck is Tabulele GX. We run this Pokemon for consistency, but because we run Psychic Energies and because naturally Tabulele does have a solid attack, you can use it sometimes, and it's a major help. You kind of want it on your bench, to be honest. But that's also a GX Pokemon, so it can't deal with Hoopa and Alolan Ninetales. But that's pretty much it. You can try and take out ways to deal with this Pokemon, and I did try and build this deck having Trevenant in here too. Like I had a Trevenant, Vileplume, Gengar deck once upon a time that I was trying out, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work as well. And you're running Stage 1 Pokemon with the Stage 2 line and Gengar. But, I guess if you want to try it, if you want to do something. The importance of Vileplume is that it can sit on your bench and provide the item lock, so Gengar is free to be active and attack. If it wasn't a factor, if we had other ways to get the lock while this guy was active, then I probably would have tried them out too. But Vileplume is the only real Pokemon. Like Omastar is just a pain. It's not consistent. But I mean, to summarize, I guess, because I kind of went on topic, the deck is built pretty much so you can get the item lock as soon as possible. If you play second, you want to use your Horror House GX attack, slow down your opponent while you set up those Odysseus and get them Vileplume on your next turn. If you play first, then you won't be able to use Horror House, but you can get the Vileplume at your second turn. And it's just pretty much what I said. Your opponent will always have one turn to play items for free, so you better make sure that you get your guys out as soon as possible. This deck, the way I have it, if you want to copy my list, you can get the Vileplume out very quickly most of the time. I've got the Heavy Ball, I've got Communication, Ultra Ball. I have a few ways to search the Vileplume and just be able to see it. Of course, we have a few ways to get the Rare Candy too, get our basic Pokemon. But, sometimes the deck won't cooperate with you, of course. I would like to try something different instead of running Amogus. Now that we have the Cherish Ball too, it makes Mysterious Treasure sort of a bit pointless, because both of the GX, all of my GXs here was Psychic that I'm meaning to search with Mysterious Treasure, but Cherish Ball can search all of them too now. So I'm wondering if I can build the deck slightly differently, but we need to get more Gengars and we need to get a few other things. But I mean, I wonder what else there is to say, about this deck. It's just pretty much get the item lock as soon as possible, use poltergeist, and with any luck, your opponent won't be able to retaliate. Of course, one thing that is important to mention is N. You gotta remember that your opponent needs to have a bunch of items and a bunch of trainers stuck in their hand for you to be doing damage. And sometimes when they want to sort of mess up their own hand so that they don't have items, the only way for us to deal with it reliably is using something like N. Other methods like Red Card or, I don't know, Mershadow, other things like Peeking Red Card, they're not as effective, in my opinion at least. So I just run 3 Ents, and we hope to make use of them. Most of the time your opponent will have to have trainers in hand, especially if they attack and they want to kill the Gengars. If they kill a Gengar, they have to grab 3 prizes. And grabbing 3 prizes more than likely increases their chances to get items and trainers. So, you most of the time, as long as you have item lock, you will be able to do high damage with Gengar most of the time. You want to be doing at least 200, so you can get those instant KOs on GX and EX Pokemon, maybe some Stage 1 GX Pokemon too. 250 to take care of the big guys, and with things like Reshiram, you need 300 to KO that dude, otherwise it's trouble. But Zekrom you can KO with 250. So you can get some significant one-hit knockouts if you have the lock. Which is why this deck is sort of solid in my opinion and expanded, despite its weaknesses. I enjoy using it, I win a lot of games when I use it. So yeah, the best way to try it, if you really want to try Gengar, this is pretty much it. Speaking of which, we're going up against a Hitmonchan Wobbuffet deck. I guess it's a good time to note that Wobbuffet is one of those Pokemon that can be very annoying for us because they negate our item lock, and if they do things right, this Hitmonchan can pretty much just do the hit and switch thing while being immune to our lock. So, you gotta be sort of careful. We do hit this Pokemon for weakness, and we can easily kill it, but you gotta be careful. I've played against a few of these Hitmonchan decks. I've won against them, but I've also lost against them too. I think a few times. And, it can be kind of tricky if the player is good as well and they have a good list. But this was pretty much it, guys. I just thought I'd give you guys a little bit of commentary, explanation on Gengar. I hope I didn't miss anything. There's probably more stuff I wanted to say. But you can probably catch most of it if you watch my old deck list video. And the best way to learn, besides hearing explanation, is to just watch matches. If you see how the deck plays, how I play the deck, and how it runs, you will have an idea, basically. So there's my opponent just trying to do damage on the bench Gengar there with Hitmonlee. But he's pretty much going to scoop pretty soon with Poltergeist. We have him on the ropes. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys subscribe to my channel. It is an excellent hub for all things TCG, Pokemon TCG related. And I post some other stuff for my interest too every now and then. Like I did that Bloodstained Ritual of the Night review, because I love Castlevania. But yeah, and I do decks, I do set reviews, I do a lot of different things. I've got the Pokemon TCG overview. I'm going to be bringing that back. But share this video, like this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for watching either way. Say it both 4, and what's up?